Hey students, welcome back. In this video, we're going to learn all about the coordinate system in Scratch. That's the X and Y axis and how that's laid out and how you can use it for your games. We'll talk about how to set the center point of a sprite, how to use variables to control sprites, and how to capture the mouse's X and Y position on the screen when you move your mouse around. We have here the game as it looks after you finish step one. Balloon is moving up and down, bouncing off the edge, and it is thinking its Y position. So we know that the Y position above this orange line is positive, and when it moves below the orange line in the center of the stage, it becomes negative. So this tells us something right about the coordinate system right now. We also see numbers on the stage here for the X and Y axis. We'll learn more about that in this. Also, you're going to learn about cloning. And cloning happens when you create copies of a sprite. And so every time I click on the stage, I capture the X and Y location where I click, and I create a new clone at that spot. And it continues to move and act like the original sprite, but it's controlled with different code. As you proceed through this lesson, you'll also be given the challenge to not only use the balloon sprite, but add other sprites like the apple you see here. It'll move on the X-axis. And in addition to that, you want to add code that will add extra apples or clones of the apple whenever you press the space bar. And so now we see two different ways that we can interact with our Scratch project, both with mouse clicks and with keyboard presses. And this is just the beginning of learning how to use Scratch for game development. So let's get started by creating a brand new Scratch project, and let's name it here Balloons. We want to go ahead and get rid of our cat here. We don't need the cat. Let's hit the X to remove the cat. We need to add a backdrop so that we can see the X and Y axis. We'll choose our stage over on the right, go to its backdrops, click here to choose a backdrop, and go to the very bottom of the list. You'll see the X and Y grid that I used here, and it'll be added to the stage. Let's go back to the code view now. Now it's important that you understand the grid system. Let's look at it a little bit closer up. That 0, 0 for the stage is in the very center. If you move to the left, it's a negative. If you move to the right, positive. And up is positive, down is negative. We see that the stage is negative 240 to positive 240 on the X. That means it's 480 pixels wide. It's positive 180 at the top, negative 180 at the bottom, meaning it's 360 pixels high in total. So it's important to understand your coordinate system because we use that a lot in game development. Next, we're going to add a sprite. We're going to use a balloon. We add the balloon and place it at 0, 0 right in the center. We also want to make this balloon a little bit smaller. It's a little large, so our size here, let's bring it down to about 30. We want it pretty small on the screen because we're going to add a lot of sprites. Alrighty, now let's go ahead and set the center point of our sprite. We go with that balloon sprite selected, we look at its costume. To change the center, we want to take the balloon costume and move it off to the right. You'll see a light gray circle with a hash mark in it. That represents the very circle of the sprite. I'm going to place it so that the bottom of the balloon is right at that point. It's important that you understand that the sprite has a center point and know how to change it, because all your animations and the location of the sprite depend on that X and Y. Back in the code view, let's pull out a one green flag clicked. We want to set the X and Y of the sprite. We do that here under movement, set X and set Y. Again, don't use change X and Y, that's different. Let's change these numbers to 0 and 0. I also want to change the rotation style to left and right, and I want to point in direction 0. Now again, 0 direction is up. Next I'm going to add a forever loop, and inside that, under motion, I want it to move inside the forever loop, one step. And if it gets to the edge, I want it to bounce. And I want it to think its Y position. Think is part of the looks palette. And I want it to think its X position. Now, where do we find that? Or actually, I want it to think its Y position. So I go back to motion and go down to the bottom of that motion, and we see there's several variables that are connected to the sprite automatically. Its X and Y position as well as its direction, and I can think its Y position by placing that in there. Now you want to save your work regularly, so let's click Save Now. Now let's test our program. The balloon is moving, and it's thinking its Y position. It started out at 0, 0. But we immediately see that when it moves, as soon as it hits the bottom of the top, it starts to add a decimal place to the end of our number. And so we want to change that, and we want to make it, when it thinks its Y position, always think in whole numbers. Let's look at a math operator that will help us fix that. The math operators are found in the green palette. We'll come in here, and we see that we can round a number and get its whole number. And so let's take the Y position, stick it inside there, and move this into the think block. Now by adding that, when it bounces off the top, it's no longer going to change it. Well, it might change it to a decimal number, but it will round that number into a whole number, and that makes our output look a little bit cleaner. Now we need to create variables that will allow us to store the X and Y location of the mouse when we click on the stage. We're going to make two variables here in the variable palette. Our first will be called X location, Y location. And now we see these variables are available to us. We are going to move to our stage now for this next part of coding. Make sure you choose the stage, come over to its code block. We see now our code has disappeared because we're looking not at the balloon but the stage. And let's find an event called when stage clicked. This event is only found in the stage. Go to the variables section and pull out two set blocks actually. And make sure you change this from my variable to X location and Y location. Now, whenever we click on the stage, we want to take the position of the mouse and store it in these two variables. We'll do this by going to the sensing palette, where we can find the mouse X and the mouse Y variables. These are part of the sensing palette. Let's test our program at this point and see that we now have these two variables visible on the upper left corner, the X and Y location of the mouse. And when I click anywhere on the stage, now I'm going to see that the X and Y location of the mouse, when I click, of the cursor, is being recorded and stored here. This will be helpful when I start to make clones of my balloon. Making and using clones is a really important part of game development in Scratch. We need to understand how we make them and how we code them. We're still in the code window for the stage. Let's go to the control, and at the bottom find the create clone of block. Whenever we click on the stage, we want to create a clone of our sprite, which is called Balloon 1. Now let's go back to our balloon sprite by clicking on the sprite here. And under the control palette, we'll find a event. It's actually found under control, not under event, when I start as a clone. Now this block of code will control all the clones, and this block of code, when green flag click, controls the original sprite only. That's an important distinction to remember. Go to our motion palette, find a set X and set Y, and pull that out. Again, don't use change, but set. Now, we don't want to set these to hard-coded numbers. Instead, we want to go back to our variable section, find the X and Y location variable here, and pull these out and place them inside. Make sure you don't mess up or confuse your X and Y location. Set X to X location and Y to Y location. Let's test our code, and we'll see that every time I click, I create a new clone of the original balloon. And we notice these balloons are not moving because, again, the code that controls the original sprite here, where it's being moved, is not controlling the clones. You have to have a different set of code for controlling the clones. Now we want the clones to move like the original sprite, so we need to add code for that. What you can do is repeat the code you see here for the clones. Add a forever loop, add a move one step, if on edge bounce, and think the Y position. Let's make sure we round that Y position. Now, every single clone has its own X and Y position and direction. That's important because each clone is an object of the original sprite and has its own position and its own variables. Let's test our code now. Now we see when I make clones, they move like the original sprite, and they also think their location. Now the coding challenge for you for the rest of this assignment is to add another sprite, for example, an apple. And in that apple, you want to add code that will do similar things as the balloon, but we want the apple to move on the x-axis instead of the y, so it should move to the right and the left and bounce off the wall. It should think its x location, much like the balloon was thinking its y location. But instead of responding to mouse clicks, the apple needs to respond to key presses. So when you press the space bar, you can create clones of the apple, and those should be placed on the screen at random locations. You'll need to find an operator in the operator section, which allows you to create random numbers for the X and Y location of the apple. And here are some more challenges for you. You could also create a way in which you could change the speed of the apple. You can see right now the apple is thinking its speed. If I press the 3, it'll speed up to a speed of 3. If I press a 5, it'll speed up even more. And in order to do this, you would need a variable called apple speed, and you'd have to use that variable to control how many steps the apple is moving, and you would need to be able to change it using a key press of these numbers. So I'd like you to figure out how you could do that. Thirdly, another challenge is I've added another object. Here you can see the basketball, and it seems to be moving always towards the mouse, which is kind of a fun challenge. So see if you can figure out how to add a third sprite that moves around the screen in various locations based on the direction or the position of the mouse. It's always moving towards the mouse. All right, that's it for this assignment. See if you can figure out some of these extensions and challenges on your own.